COINTELPRO, Counterintelligence Program. It's the 1960s, and you and your friends are all about love and peace. You don't like the Cold War or what the government is doing to fight its enemies. What you don't know is that the government sees you as one of those enemies too. The FBI is secretly watching you through a program called COINTELPRO. J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, created COINTELPRO. He didn't like anything that challenged the way things were, like the Civil Rights Movement or protests against the Vietnam War. If you wanted fairness or peace, he thought you were enemy number one for Uncle Sam. So who got labeled as an enemy? Civil rights leaders, anti-war protesters, feminists, environmentalists, and maybe even your grandma if she argued too much at bingo. If you had an opinion, you're on Hoover's list of people to spy on. The FBI didn't just watch people, they acted like villains in a spy movie. They spread lies, forged papers, joined groups to mess them up from the inside, and even started fights. The scary part? These weren't movie villains. This was the government going after people who just wanted things to be better. The FBI kept all of this a secret, but in 1971, some brave activists broke into an FBI office in Pennsylvania. They found documents about COINTELPRO and sent them to the press. When the truth came out, people were shocked and left the FBI scrambling to explain why they'd turned into the country's biggest villains. The FBI had to shut down the program that same year, but the trust people had in the government was already broken. Roswell UFO investigation. Imagine walking through Roswell, New Mexico one evening when something strange falls from the sky. Back then, everyone was talking about UFOs and little green men from outer space. Curious, you go to check it out and find something that looks like it came from a sci-fi movie, or maybe a hardware store in space. You call the local sheriff, but before you know it, the army shows up. They say they've recovered a flying disc. This became known as the Roswell UFO Incident. At first, it sounded like a big deal. The army even announced it in a press release, but then they quickly changed their story. In a press conference, they said, "Never mind folks, it was just a weather balloon." That sudden switch made people suspicious. This moment started one of the biggest conspiracy theories in history. For decades, people have wondered what really crashed in Roswell and where it came from. In the 1990s, the US government declassified documents about the incident. The FBI's files revealed that the flying disc was actually part of Project Mogul. This was a secret program that used high-altitude balloons to detect Soviet nuclear tests during the Cold War. It's not as exciting as alien visitors, but still a Cold War spy drama. The FBI memos described debris made of foil-like material, sticks, and other ordinary objects. These were no alien gadgets, no glowing spaceships, and definitely no ET looking for a phone. Still, the Army's early secrecy and their talk about a flying disc made people suspicious. Many began to dig deeper, like detectives in a mystery story. The Pizza Connection case. The Pizza Connection case is anything but a cheesy food heist. Instead, it's one of the largest drug trafficking cases in US history, involving the FBI, the mafia, and your favorite pizza place down the street. In the 1970s and 1980s, a bunch of Sicilian mafia members and their American cousins cooked up a plan to smuggle heroin from Southeast Asia into the United States. Instead of dealing with dark alleys or sketchy warehouses, they used pizza parlors as their front because no one suspects a friendly pizza shop of being a heroin distribution hub. They thought they could deliver more than just pepperoni without raising eyebrows. It turned out that ordering extra toppings meant putting in an extra dose of drugs on top of your pepperoni. The operation stretched across multiple states, with heroin hidden in shipments of canned tomatoes, pizza ovens, and other restaurant supplies. Once it landed, the drugs were distributed through these pizzerias, with the proceeds laundered back to Sicily. It was a billion-dollar operation that made Pizza Hut look like a local family restaurant. The FBI and DEA caught on to the scheme, but cracking the case was no small slice of the pie. Agents had to infiltrate the mafia's tight-knit circles and decode their cryptic communications, often in Sicilian dialect. It was like an episode of The Sopranos, but real. After years of surveillance and wiretaps, they finally unraveled the operation. In 1984, the FBI dropped the hammer. Over 100 people were arrested in the US and Italy. The trial began in 1985 and was a legal marathon lasting nearly 2 years. It turns out crime doesn't pay, even when served with extra cheese. Operation Abscam. Imagine being an FBI agent and your boss tells you to throw on your best Arab costume, learn the language, and perfect the accent. Congratulations, you're now starring in the FBI's Middle Eastern Cosplay Championship. Except instead of nerdy anime fans, you're networking with sheikhs, who probably have more oil than Texas. Called Operation Abscam, which stands for Arab Scam, the FBI tried to find a way to root out corruption in politics. This operation involved agents dressed up as rich Arabs, offering bribes to politicians. It was like a a political soap opera with fancy outfits, briefcases full of cash, and undercover stunts that could rival a spy movie. Initially, it was about catching folks trafficking stolen art and fake securities, but it quickly escalated into uncovering political bribery. The agents set up a fake company, Abdul Enterprises, and pretended to be billionaire Arab businessmen offering cash for political favors. It was like Undercover Boss with just a pinch of Arabian Nights. The craziest part was how successful it was. The FBI caught 7 members of Congress, 6 representatives, and 1 senator. These politicians were caught on tape taking bribes and making shady deals. One even promised to help a fake sheikh move to the US in exchange for a pile of cash. It was like reality TV before reality TV even existed. Not everyone thought this was a great idea. Some critics said the FBI made the bribes too tempting, like putting cookies in front of a kid and then blaming them for eating. Others felt the FBI cared more about creating drama than actually serving justice. Still, the operation ended with several convictions and showed just how much corruption was hiding under the Capitol's shiny dome. The Flying Saucer Memo. The FBI's Flying Saucer Memo has been a favorite topic for UFO conspiracy theories and wild debates for decades. People have wondered if aliens might secretly be hanging out with government agents, sipping coffee, and sharing cosmic gossip. It all started in 1950 when an FBI agent named Guy Hartel sent a memo to his boss, J. Edgar Hoover. The memo, now declassified and available online, is often called proof of alien encounters. It's not a long document, but it's packed with details about what sounds like a flying saucer crash. Imagine the memo as the government's version of, "I heard it from a friend of a friend." Hartel wrote that an Air Force investigator said 3 flying saucers were found in New Mexico. Each saucer was about 50 feet wide and carried 3 human-like beings. These beings were only 3 feet tall and wore shiny metallic clothing that made them look like space fashion models in the intergalactic runway. The report even mentioned that some mysterious energy might have caused the saucers to crash. Before you grab your tinfoil hat, here's the twist. The FBI has said this memo doesn't prove anything. It's just a retelling of a story that was going around at the time. It might have been linked to the famous Roswell incident or even a hoax. The memo doesn't include any real evidence. It's more like a high school rumor that got way out of hand. Even so, UFO fans got excited when the memo was declassified in 2011. They called it proof of alien life. But really, it's more like proof of how quickly rumors can grow, especially if you add shiny jumpsuits and mysterious energy into the mix. We might not have discovered aliens yet, but we're definitely good at turning small stories into big intergalactic drama. The surveillance of Albert Einstein. It's already boring enough to sit through an entire physics class in college, but imagine being the one who had to spy on Albert Einstein and listen to everything he had to say about the cosmos. You'd think the guy who gave us E=mc² would be too busy pondering the universe to warrant government surveillance, but the FBI still thought he was suspicious enough. Apparently, the Bureau thought the universe wasn't the only thing Einstein was plotting. Back in the early 20th century, Einstein was already a world-famous scientist. But when he moved to the US in 1933 to escape Nazi Germany, he brought more than just his genius, but also some political baggage. Or at least that's how J. Edgar Hoover and his FBI saw it. Einstein was a known pacifist, a vocal supporter of civil rights, and he wasn't shy about criticizing authoritarian regimes. To the FBI, this sounded suspiciously like communism. And if there was one thing Hoover hated more than Mondays, it was communism. For the next 20 years, the FBI kept a close eye on Einstein. They collected a huge 1,800-page file about him. They looked into his letters, his friends, and the groups he supported, like the NAACP. Some agents even worried he might be building a secret death ray. Despite all this drama, the FBI couldn't uncover evidence to suggest that Einstein was anything more than a science nerd with a passion for peace and justice. Decades later, when the files were finally declassified, people saw this colossal waste of paranoia. Turns out Einstein was just Einstein, except now he had 1,800 pages of FBI fan fiction to add to his legacy. The Pentagon Papers leak. Imagine it's the 1960s, and people in the US were giving it to the government, telling leaders they weren't exactly supporting the Vietnam War. But public officials insisted everything was all rainbows and butterflies in Southeast Asia, telling them they were progressing with peace talks with the Vietnamese. In reality, the US had been stuck in Vietnam for way longer than most people knew, and the story wasn't pretty. Then came Daniel Ellsberg, a military analyst who had access to a lot of secret information. Turns out he wasn't just analyzing military strategies, but was analyzing exposing just how deep the government had dug itself into a hole. One day, Ellsberg found a top-secret Pentagon study. It showed that for years, the government had been making bad decisions and covering them up. Frustrated by what he found, Ellsberg decided to share the truth. He copied thousands of pages of these secret papers and gave them to big newspapers, starting with the New York Times in 1971. This caused a huge fight between the government and the media. It also made Ellsberg a target. The government wanted to know how he managed to copy 7,000 pages without breaking the copier or running out of ink. Suddenly, the FBI was on Ellsberg like ants on a picnic, even breaking into his psychiatrist's office to dig up dirt. They probably hoped for something scandalous, but ended up looking like kids rummaging through a junk drawer. People began debating whether the government should keep secrets or if the public had the right to know the truth. The FBI ended up looking less like heroes and more like kids caught stealing cookies. The case eventually went to the Supreme Court, which made a big decision. The justices sided with Ellsberg and the newspapers, basically telling the government that national security isn't a magic spell to hide bad decisions. John F. Kennedy assassination. It's 1963 and America juggles so many big events that it feels like a circus on steroids. The space race was blasting off, civil rights protests were boiling over, and Cold War fears loomed like a storm cloud. Then on November 22nd, the country was blindsided. President John F. Kennedy was shot in Dallas, Texas. The official story pinned the blame on Lee Harvey Oswald, a lone gunman perched in a building. But for many, this explanation was like a rickety ladder because it didn't quite hold up. Over time, theories sprouted like weeds in a messy garden. Was it the mafia with their shady dealings? Is the CIA pulling strings like a bad puppet show? Maybe even little green men from Mars? In 1992, Congress cut through the chaos with a law to release secret government files. Slowly, these documents came to light, promising answers, but delivering more riddles. The files revealed the FBI and CIA were eyeballing Oswald long before the tragedy. This guy was no ordinary Joe. In 1959, he packed his bags and headed to the Soviet Union, then strolled back to America in 1962 with a Russian wife in tow. The government kept an eye on him, but seemed to fumble the ball at every turn. One glaring piece of evidence was an FBI memo that screamed trouble. Someone called their Dallas office and spilled the beans. A nut wants to kill the president. The message landed on J. Edgar Hoover's desk. Instead of acting like a hawk guarding its nest, Hoover seemed more interested in being the hero who caught the bad guy after the fact. In the end, the files felt more like breadcrumbs leading to nowhere. They didn't spell out who orchestrated the assassination, but painted a picture of government bungles, ignored warnings, and Cold War tension tighter than a drum. The mystery of Dealey Plaza remains like a puzzle missing its final piece. Jeffrey Epstein. Imagine it's the 2000s. A guy named Jeffrey Epstein seems to have hit the jackpot of life. Picture him flying around in private jets, lounging in mansions, and rubbing elbows with the world's big shots. But behind this shiny curtain was a backstage full of horrors. People whispered about how he was mentoring young girls, but it was more like the wolf hosting a sheep sleepover. In 2005, a teenage girl in Florida spoke up, and the police started looking into Epstein. More girls spoke up, each story like another log on the fire. You'd think Epstein's world would come crashing down, right? Nope. With a mountain of cash, a squad of slick lawyers, and connections that could rival a spy movie, he walked away with a slap on the wrist. In 2008, he went to jail for only 13 months and could leave 6 days a week to work. It was more like a hotel stay with a bedtime than real justice. Jump to 2019 and Epstein was arrested again, this time for federal sex trafficking. The FBI had receipts. For decades, he had been harming girls, jetting them around on his private plane while mingling with people whose names make headlines. The money trail was shady enough to make a detective cry, but it had kept him untouchable for years. Before a trial could happen, Epstein was found dead in his jail cell. Officials said it was suicide, but things didn't add up. The cameras were conveniently out of order, and the guards were apparently on the world's longest coffee break. People started coming up with all kinds of wild theories. Was someone with power making sure Epstein could never spill the tea? After he died, even more secrets came out. He had ties to politicians, celebrities, and even royalty. People started wondering how many knew what he was up to and why they stayed silent. Declassified files revealed some folks in charge weren't exactly rushing to stop him. It felt less like justice and more like the FBI attending a party after everyone had already gone home. The Silvermaster File. The FBI's Silvermaster File isn't about cool spies with exploding pens or slick cars, but it's still brimming with Cold War suspense. Picture a chess game where every move is made in the shadows. It's all tied to Nathan Gregory Silvermaster, a government economist who didn't just crunch numbers, he was accused of flipping them into coded secrets for the Soviets. Instead of tax charts, he allegedly sent blueprints for America's defense straight to Moscow. Like a nosy neighbor with binoculars, the FBI started watching him in 1942. Their findings turned into a 16,000-page blockbuster file packed with intercepted whispers, shadowy meetings, and tales from informants. Silvermaster and his crew, which included government bigwigs and brainy academics, were accused of spilling secrets like a leaky faucet. These secrets covered everything from military strategies to foreign policies and even nuclear projects. They reportedly used code names, hidden compartments, and cryptic notes that were all part of the show. Despite all the drama, Silvermaster was never convicted. The government had to tiptoe carefully, since tossing big names into court during an anti-communist frenzy was like juggling dynamite. Some of his alleged accomplices, like Alger Hiss, ended up behind bars. Others managed to pull Houdini-like escapes, leaving only traces of suspicion behind. Historians and conspiracy buffs still debate whether Silvermaster was a mastermind spy or just a convenient scapegoat. Either way, he left behind enough breadcrumbs to keep theorists nibbling for decades.